Good morning, everyone. I've been giving a series of talks on called the Five Ranks of Tozan, and there's two separate five ranks, and I just completed talking about the first set, which is a relative and the absolute. And today I'm going to start on the second set, which is in Japanese called the Kokun Goi, and Kokun is roughly translated as a sequence of merit, and Goi is five ranks. So it's a sequence of merit, five ranks. But in particular, the five ranks, I'll just mention the titles of them. The first one's called Shift, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Shift that we need to make in order to fully engage in this practice. The second is called submission, or it could be surrender, or it could be letting go, okay, what we're holding on to. And I'll talk about that next time. And then the third is awakening, and the fourth is collective awakening, and the fifth is absolute awakening. And each one of these stages or ranks has a verse that Tozan composed to describe it, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, as well as some general comments about this stage. But if you're familiar with the 10 ox herding pictures of Zen, these five ranks are kind of linear progression or ascending, and they're similar, except there's five, and in the 10 ox herding pictures, there's 10. And the ones we just finished talking about, the relative and the absolute, I mentioned that each one is contained in the other, and they're more like a circular path where you just keep continuing, and it's more like a spiral, which is more appropriate because you never return to the same place. You're always moving forward. But at each stage in at each stage of these ranks, there always has to be a shift. So shift is important at every stage in our practice. And we have all kinds of shifts in our lives. And this shift is talking about shifting from dwelling in samsara or delusion toward a path of awakening or seeing clearly. So, in order to practice the Buddha way, there has to be a shift in your attitude. And like the Buddha did, you feel the pain of life and the uncertainty of sickness, old age, and death. And at some point, you decide it's important to resolve these issues, and your whole being shifts. But people are attracted to Zen for a wide variety of reasons, and every one of the reasons is valid. There's no correct reason for coming to Zen. But all newcomers to Zen have one thing in common. They're not satisfied with their life the way it is. And that dissatisfaction could range from mild discomfort to dis-ease to severe anxiety and depression. And there's a recognition that one has to change one's life, or there will be no peace, tranquility, or equanimity in it. So the first thing we do when we recognize this is make resolutions. I'm going to eat better and get more exercise. And then my outlook, my mental state will shift. Or I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to get out of my toxic relationship. And I'm going to seek out more positive people who accept me the way I am. So if these are New Year's resolutions, they often last for 1 month or so before they're forgotten. Then finally, in an act of desperation, you may have heard someone on the Oprah Winfrey show or a friend talk about meditation. And the mental and physical benefits that come from it, and you decide to try it. First, you might put one toe in and then a whole foot, and you encounter others who've decided to follow the path of meditation, and they encourage you to continue, and you see something compelling about them that urges you to continue. Have you made a commitment, or is it just a fad that's caught your fancy? So this shift has to be present from top to bottom. It's not just a casual thing that Master Tozan is talking about here. Master Rinzai, who's a contemporary of Tozan's, and they lived in the 9th century in China, gave this instruction. He said, you must right now turn your light around and shine it on yourselves. Do not go seeking somewhere else. Then you will understand that in body and mind, you are no different from the ancestors and Buddhas. So they're saying, turn the light around. I mean, we're looking for something outside. If I just change my external situation, then I'll be okay. But he's saying, no, turn the light around, shine it inside. So you have to jump in and learn to swim, or that light will just keep shining somewhere else, other than at the source of your discontent. You know, it's like the story of the drunk who was looking for his keys at night under a lamppost. And a passerby offered to help and asked the drunk, exactly where did you lose your keys? And he pointed out into the dark and somewhere and said it was over there. So the passerby said, well, why are you looking here? And the drunk said, because there's light here. So where are you going to shine your light? Where the key resides? Yeah, which is in your own heart. So to study Zen is to study the self. So a monk asked Master Tozan, the author of these 5 ranks, what is the meaning of shift? And Tozan replied, what do you do when eating rice? So it's implied that the shift is from the diluted relative state to the absolute state of awareness. So when you're eating rice, do you just eat rice, or are you drifting off to all kinds of thoughts about the external world while absent-mindedly putting rice in your mouth? So what do you do when eating rice? Where is your focus? So there's an old Zen story about a student who asked Master Ichu, please write for me something of great wisdom. And Master Ichu picked up his brush, his calligraphy brush, and wrote one word, attention. The student said, is that all? Oh, he said, no. He wrote, attention, attention. And the student became irritable. That doesn't seem profound or subtle to me. In response, he wrote, attention, attention, attention. In frustration, the student demanded, well, what does attention mean? And Master Ichu replied, attention means attention. So in eating your rice, where is your attention? How easy it is for our attention to fade. We have all kinds of thoughts in our mind about how we want things to be different from what they are. That's why we get so much pleasure fantasizing about the past and the future. But if we are content, we wouldn't be constantly looking outside ourselves for happiness and satisfaction. In the first ox herding picture, which is entitled The Search for the Ox, and just to clarify, the ox in these ox herding pictures is our true nature, our true self. So searching for the ox. Why the search? The ox has never been missing from the beginning. However, when you turn yourself away from yourself, your own ox has become a stranger. And eventually, you get lost in far dusty regions. And desire for profit and fear of loss flare up like a raging fire. And views of right and wrong arise in opposition to one another, like spears on a battlefield. So what gives rise to this shift? It can be reading a sutra, one of the writings of the Buddha, hearing the teachings that enable you on some level to intellectually grasp something of the meaning of the Buddha's truth. But at this point, you can't distinguish between what is genuine and what is not, what is true and what's false. You have found the path, the way, and you understand that things are perfect as they are, but it just doesn't feel that way. So in one of his writings, Fukan Zazengi, Master Dogen said, you should stop the intellectual activity of pursuing words and learn the stepping back and turning the light around and shining it back on yourself. Body and mind will naturally drop off and the original face will appear. And Dogen also encouraged us in another writing, Ehe Koroku, where he said, everyone, without exception, holds on to the jewel that glows in the night. Unless we turn the light around and shine it within, how can we hold close the jewel when we are lost in the outlying countryside? So all these Zen masters are telling us to turn the light around and look within, and see what's going on. So in my own life, shift was not a matter of just starting to meditate. It permeated every aspect of my life. Not all at once, but step by step and gradually. The more I meditated, it affected who I hung out with. I stopped spending time with old friends who just wanted to party and obliterate themselves. I spent my time with friends who wanted to meditate and obliterate themselves. It's a different kind of obliteration, huh? So I was working in a university, and I did not use my vacation time to luxuriate in tropical beaches. For years, I used all my vacation time to attend session. Can you imagine? But for me, that was the best use of the time they gave me to take off from work. There are other shifts. So I mentioned in my autobiography that I wrote on Zen called My American Zen Life, that back in the 60s, it was recreational drugs that kind of showed me the way to meditation. But I cut back and quit using them. Another shift. So the shift not only occurs on the cushion in the Zendo, it has to occur in the whole life. Otherwise, it's only a partial shift. But each of us has to follow our own heart and go at our own pace. But once I saw the value of Zen in my life and in the lives of others, I did not hold back. Well, some of you have had Jukai and taken the precepts and wear a rakusu. And during that ceremony, you vowed to maintain certain precepts. I mean, these precepts are not imposed from the outside. They arise from the inside at the most fundamental level, and you reveal your life as these precepts. So it's not a question of following some moral teaching. You are the moral teaching itself. That vow is a shift. And these vows continue without end. Well, let's look at Tozan's verse for shift. I have a couple different translations here. I'm just going to touch on two of them. So the one, when I studied this with Maizumi Roshi, this is the one I used. Following the example set by Emperor Yao, the emperor teaches the way to live to his people generously. At times he passes by the noisy marketplace, while all people welcome his royal rule. That's a verse was from Charles Luck, and William Powell translated all of the sayings of Master Tozan. He translates it a little differently. He says, the sage kings from the beginning made Yao the norm. He governed the people by means of rites and kept his dragon waist bent. The dragon waist is describing the royal waist, and if it's bent, that means he's bowing to the people. Yeah. And once he passed from one end of the market to the other, he found that everywhere culture flourished and the august dynasty was celebrated. Well, let's unpack this a little bit and see what he's saying. So the first line, following the example set by Emperor Yao. So who is Emperor Yao? He's one of the celebrated ancient rulers of ancient China, and he reigned for 100 years from 2357 to 2257 before the Christian era. But in this verse, he's a representative of the Buddha and our Zen ancestors. So following the example set by the Buddha, we could say, or following the example set by Emperor Yao. So we all need role models in order to see what's possible. So I looked for role models when I was a kid. I was a young Jewish boy, and I love sports. And there were not a lot of famous Jewish athletes for role models. I remember looking into it at the time. You know the sport that had most of the famous Jewish athletes? Boxing. Can you imagine? If you look it up, there were some really famous Jewish boxers back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Maxie Bayer and Benny Leonard, some of the names of two of them. But I didn't like boxing, so I couldn't find a role model there. I love baseball. But at the time, there was only one famous Jewish baseball player. His name was Hank Greenberg, but he played for the Detroit Tigers. I didn't like the Detroit Tigers. So he couldn't be a role model. Later on, Sandy Koufax came along, and he almost fit the bill, but he was too late. I was already well past that stage. That's probably in my late 20s or 30s, but he played for the LA Dodgers, which was good, but he was a pitcher. I like other positions better than pitchers. So I looked elsewhere, and I found a lot of inspiration when I read about Albert Einstein. He was brilliant, compassionate, and he was Jewish. That might have had something to do with my choosing to study physics, but there was something else. I wanted to know all the mysteries of the universe. And that quest led me beyond Einstein to Buddhism. So I tried to follow the example of the Buddha, of my teachers, or at least the best parts of my teachers, my parents, their best parts too, and my other mentors that I had when I was in academia and business. So that's what it's saying. Just follow the example of the Buddha, follow the example of the Buddha's teachings. Does it resonate with you? Does somehow it create a spark in you? Is it something that you're attracted to? So looking at it from the other side, there's a saying about when you become a Zen teacher, then you have to become an example. And there's a saying about becoming a Zen teacher. They say it's like putting on an iron yoke. It's a heavy responsibility, and your life becomes an open book as an example to others. So what kind of an example is it? And Master Tozan, same Master Tozan in a koan, said, as to that, I always take heed. So what are you doing when you're eating your rice? Are you taking heed? So the second line of the verse says, the emperor teaches the way to live to his people generously. So what was the shift that caused you to be here? Did you read a book by a Zen master who generously shared the Dharma? Did you hear a sutra and it resonated with you? Did a friend tell you, if you don't meditate, I can't be your friend? Wei Neng, who's the sixth ancestor in China. I think many of you know his story. He was an illiterate wood gatherer. And he was selling wood in the marketplace, and he heard a itinerant monk chanting the Diamond Sutra. And he heard the lines, "Dwelling in no place, raise the Bodhi mind, the mind that seeks for enlightenment." And it resonated with Wei Neng, and he had a deep experience of awakening. And that was his shift, just hearing that chant in the marketplace. Back in the early 1960s, I read The Three Pillars of Zen by Philip Capla, and I know some of you have read it. It was the first book about Zen practice. All previous books I'd read were about Zen theory or philosophy and stories about Zen masters, but they didn't tell you how to meditate. I was struck by this book, and especially by the enlightenment experiences of the students. They inspired me to shift and to begin to practice. And I set out to study the way in all earnestness. And as I followed the instructions in the book, The Three Pillars of Zen, it made sense to me. One of the things that attracted me was I didn't have to believe in anything. I just had to experience it myself through my own meditation practice. And the next line of the verse says, "At times he passes by the noisy marketplace." So what's unique about the noisy marketplace? Well, back in those days, I'm sure the marketplace was full of people and chaotic. You don't see everything going on. See, but it's your life. Whatever you do, whatever you say, whatever you think, that's the path, if you see it clearly. See, there's harmony in everything. Master Gensha said that even in the deep, dark mountain cave of demons, perfect freedom is functioning. So we have to see it, though. And the student asked the same Master Gensha, "How can I enter into Zen?" And Gensha said to him, "Do you hear the sound of the mountain stream?" And the student said, "Yes, I do." Then Gensha said, "Then enter Zen from there." Do you hear the wind? We have a strong wind today, rushing through the trees or the wind chime. Enter Zen from there. Do you hear the birds chirping? Enter Zen from there. Did your partner or housemate complain that you left a mess in the kitchen? Enter Zen from there. Did you get discouraged reading the latest news about the war in Ukraine? Enter Zen from there. Torie Zenji, see, if a cat jumps on your lap, enter Zen from there. Torie Zenji, a successor of Hakuin's, wrote a wonderful verse called the Bodhisattvas Vow. And it starts out like this. When I, a student of the Dharma, look at the real form of the universe, all is a never-failing manifestation of the mysterious truth of Tathagata. Tathagata is the Buddha. When I, a student of the Dharma, look at the real form of the universe, all is a never-failing manifestation of the mysterious truth of Tathagata. In any event, in any moment, and in any place, none can be other than the marvelous revelation of its glorious light. How can he say that? In any event, in any moment, in any place. See, Torie Zenji doesn't leave any stone unturned. I'm sure you can think of many exceptions that are not marvelous revelations of the Tathagata's glorious light. But Torie Zenji has no exceptions. Even in the noisy, chaotic marketplace, which represents every moment of every employment you've ever had. It includes every interaction with everybody in your life, even your sworn enemies. It includes every distasteful thing you had to do, including cleaning the latrine or putting down a pet. He's not kidding. He says in every event, in any moment, in any place. So, then another Zen master asked, on whose doorstep does the sun not shine? So, at times, he passes by the noisy marketplace. And then the last line, while all people welcome his royal rule. What happens when you welcome the royal rule? It doesn't mean that you will be the prime minister with lots of power. At least not in this case. Okay. It does not mean that your special privilege will be bestowed upon you. No, quite to the contrary. It means you become the servant. And we have a koan. Shakyamuni Buddha and Maitreya are servants of another. Who is that other? The Indian Nobel Prize-winning poet, mystic, and philosopher Rabindranath Tagore wrote these lines. I slept and dreamed that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. Yeah. So when we accept the royal rule, that's what happens. We become at service to others. His dynasty is celebrated is another translation. It sounds like the second step of the 12 steps of AA, which says we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So what is that power greater than ourselves? Of course, a Buddhist approach to this would be to get ourselves out of the way and let that greater power, which is our true self, manifest. So this last line is saying you'll be peaceful if you're in harmony with everything. At least you have faith in the path. In my case, I was willing to test or examine the path. I really did feel home because as a scientist, I didn't have to believe in anything beyond my own experience. I could find out for myself. So when I tried it, it wasn't easy. It was difficult. My mind was busy. My body was stiff. At first, it was like when I took up golf, which I played with my father in order to do something with him. And I was never good at golf. But when I got one par in 18 holes, that was enough for me to come back and try it again. The same thing when I went to retreats, to Zen retreats. If I had a few moments of clarity where my mind was quiet and expansive, it was enough for me to come back. So I kept returning and had a few more moments of clarity. Yeah. And then when I was a resident at the Zen Center in Los Angeles, it got to a point where I couldn't tell the difference between being in retreat and not being in retreat. So what are you doing when you're eating your rice? So at this point, at the point of shift, you still can't distinguish what's genuine and what is not, what is true and what's false. You found the path, the way, and you understand that things are perfect as they are, yet it doesn't always feel like that. One Zen master lamented, "How many times have I changed my firmly determined mind? Mind, how unreliable. How many times have we shifted?" So that firmly determined mind might know for sure, or at least it thinks it does, but it's your body that does. Listen to your heart. Your heart knows when a shift is necessary. And once we shift, you know what we discover? We need to keep shifting. There's no safe, secure, and final ground upon which to stand. So what's the next shift? Well, the next rank, the next stage is called submission. So I'll talk about that next time.